Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're wrapping up our Yuan clan of Runan Let's Talk Lore series, as we will run through the remaining 3 generations of the prestigious Yuan clan, with a particular focus on Wenzing's line, as after all, Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu are from this line. So picking up from where we left off last time, we have Yuan Chung, the youngest son of Yuan An, reaching the Grand Excellency position in the year 116. But his rise to this position was during a rather turbulent time during the Eastern Han history. First, we have to remember that Yuan An's 3 sons all rose to power during the reign of Emperor Liu Zhao, who was the 4th emperor of the Eastern Han dynasty. In his earlier day, his court was controlled by the Empress Dowager's Dou clan, but with the help of the eunuchs, he was able to eventually regain control of the courts and become probably the last enlightened ruler of the Eastern Han. Unfortunately, when he was just 27 years old in the year 106, he passes away to sickness, leaving behind a son, Liu Long, who was not even 1 year old at this time. And after a short 8 months later, Liu Long would also die, leaving the imperial bloodline without a direct heir, and he would go down in history as the shortest reign of all the Chinese emperors. Thus, at this time, Liu Long's mother, the Empress Dowager Deng, who is now the regent, has to pick a suitable heir from the other branches of the imperial clan. So naturally, Emperor Liu Zhao's older brother, Liu Qing, who had been the crown prince before Empress Dou framed his mother, the then empress, of witchcraft, which casted him away, but now he's deemed the closest in line to succeed the crown. But since he was already adult at this time and would be a bit hard to control, his son Liu Hu was picked instead, and he was only 12 at this time. So naturally, given the new emperor's young age, the Empress Dowager Deng kept the regency, and she retained her power. Now, unlike Empress Dowager Dou and her reign with her brothers, Empress Dowager Deng and her older brother, who was now the general of the chariot at this time, were much more careful in regards to holding on to their power. In the early days of her reign, there were attempts by the court to overthrow her and her brothers by force. But when these news of the coup leaked, she took the initiative with a show of force, as many officials were arrested and executed. And unlike the Dou clan, the Deng clan's desire for power rested almost entirely on the Empress Dowager, as her 2 brothers flat out refused to abuse their sister's position. Her older brother turned down all the positions and rewards his sister bestowed on him, going as far as hiding away from imperial heralds in order to refuse bestowments. His younger brother went even farther, as he told his sister openly at court that the emperor should be now old enough, given that he's already 26 by this time, to take on the duties of the emperor himself, to which she responded by firmly firing him from his post and cutting him out of the clan. Now, if you think this is a bit over the top and cruel, you can contrast this with another official who had tried the same thing earlier that year, to which Empress Dowager Deng responded by having his head covered in a bag before beating him to death with a club openly in the imperial court, before tossing his body over the city walls as an example. But to be fair to Empress Dowager Deng, who is definitely cruel, her 16 years of reign before her death of natural causes was rather efficient for the empire at large, which was coming under challenge from nomads in the west again. But her cruelty and lack of support from her own clan did force her to rely heavily on eunuchs, which will continue to grow into a major problem for the Eastern Han dynasty moving forward. But regardless, it was in the backdrop of this chaotic period that Yuan Chang would eventually rise to become Grand Excellency. But his reign as Grand Excellency was extremely short-lived, as barely 1 year into his appointment, his son, Yuan Shu, would make a grave error at court where he would share sensitive information with the wrong officials. And this would cause Yuan Chang to be dismissed from his post as Grand Excellency. But luckily, Yuan Chang would die very soon after, which I understand is never a great thing, But because his death was so close to his dismissal, the court took mercy on him for his lifetime of service at court and returned the position to him so that he can have a grand burial as a Grand Excellency. As for his son, there was not too much recorded about him aside from his mistake at court, but we do know that he would recover from this error as his father took on most of his blame and was quickly forgiven, and he would eventually become the minister of the Imperial Guards. But aside from this, we know very little of his life, and his son, Yuan Yi, however, is someone we're more familiar with thanks to the fact that he starts out with his own faction in the Mandate of Heaven chapter pack in the game Total War Three Kingdoms. And indeed, he definitely played a role during the early periods of the Three Kingdoms as he held a key position as the administrator of the Shangyang Commandery, and when his fellow clan member, Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu, would form the coalition against Dongzhuo, he would rally to their cause, as he would lead a force south to first help rescue Wang Quan from near military disaster, before finally fizzling out alongside the coalition, which eventually did nothing against Dongzhuo. Yet, when the coalition ended, Yuan Yi didn't fade away, as he would stick around with Yuan Shao. And when Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu started their proxy war against each other, Yuan Yi was appointed by Yuan Shao as a prefect of the Yang province in an effort to dislodge Yuan Shu from that region. However, after a failed military campaign against his nephew Yuan Shu, his own men would kill him in a coup after being displeased with their current situation. Now, as for his faction starting position in the game Total War Three Kingdoms, where he has a faction in Chang'an, this can be explained by his earliest post as the mayor of Chang'an before rising to become administrator of Shangyang in his younger days. And now that we have covered the entirety of Yuan Chang's line, let's return to his older brother, Yuan Shang's line, as we're going to be saving the bulk of our discussion at the end for Wenzing's sons. Now, for Yuan Shang's lines, his son, Yuan Zhu, would eventually also become a court advisor, much like his father, but he would get tangled up with a future regent named Liang Ji, who we did cover in our Fall of the Han Let's Talk Lore series, which will eventually result in his fall from grace, which is a rather short version of what happened in his life, and there's not too much interesting thing going on for the rest of this branch. So with these side branches covered, let's move on towards Wenzing's line, which is much more interesting, as first off, his oldest son, Yuan Peng, took up his father's anti-corruption stance, but instead of swearing off politics and becoming a hermit like his father, he instead became this incorruptible administrator of Nanyang before eventually rising to become the minister of the Imperial Guards, which seems to be a very common minister position to be locked down by the Yuan clan, as he's now the second Yuan clan member to hold this post. And his son, Yuan He, would be rather unspectacular, as he would live a rather quiet life as the chancellor of the princedom of Pengcheng. But his three sons here will actually continue their grandfather's anti-corruption stance. And as you can see, by this final generation here, the Yuan clan of Runan was already immensely powerful and wealthy, which is not the development direction that all Yuan clan members are proud of. Yuan Hong, the oldest son of Yuan He, for example, was actually quite sad to see his clan enjoying the spoils of corrupt political dealings that ran rampant during this period, and after the first party incident occurred, he would follow in his great-grandfather's path as he would resign from his government post to become a hermit himself. And much like his great-grandfather, he will earn himself quite a reputation among both scholars and regular civilians, to the point where even when the Yellow Turban rebellions occurred, the rebels collectively agreed to not harass him in his land out of respect for what he is as a hermit, swearing off the government. And this led indirectly to a flood of refugees deciding to take shelter on his land, as he would house many of them during this chaotic period. And at the end, Yuan Hong would live out the rest of his days until he would die of old age at 57. Yet compared to him, his two younger brothers probably took this disgust for their own clan even farther. First, the middle son, Yuan Zhong, resigned from his post as the chancellor of the princedom of Pei, before deciding to uproot his entire family to move south, away from all the family connections they had in the north, as they moved to the southern commandery of Kuaiji to get away from this all. And when Sun Ce would take over Kuaiji from Wang Lang, he decided to move his family even farther by taking a boat and traveling all the way to the Jiao province, where he thought he would live in peace. But unfortunately, due to his family connections, he would eventually receive an imperial summon that would ask him to take a court position back in the capital, and he would have to take on the post of the lieutenant of the guards. And finding it very hard to turn down a direct invitation from the emperor, Janjong would decide to make his way back to the capital, but unfortunately, he would die along the way back. And then, finally, we have the youngest son, Yuan Hong, who has a very similar name to his oldest brother, but it's slightly different character. Now, he was so disgusted with the clan that he decided to change his family name as a symbol of turning his back on his clan, as he cut himself out of the clan matters, going as far as refusing to even socialize with his fellow clan members, and he would live within his house in isolation for the rest of his days. And collectively, we can see that these three sons here represent this internal backlash within the clan of the direction of their clan as a whole. Now, in stark contrast to Yuan Peng's line and their stance against this corruptive nature of the government in the later years of the Eastern Han Dynasty, we have Yuan Tang, the younger son of Wenzin, who fully embraced the political climate of the time, as he would carefully navigate the tough political waters of these turbulent years of the Eastern Han Dynasty to finally rise through the ranks of the government until he would eventually hold office in all three of the Grand Excellency positions at various times. And unlike most of the emperor he would go on to serve, Yuan Tang would live a long time, as he would die at an advanced age of 86 years old, leaving behind a total of 12 sons, many of whom failed to outlive their father. Of course, given the size limitation of our family tree here, not all 12 sons are recorded, but I did include his three eldest sons in Yuan Ping, who died very young, Yuan Chung, who would reach the rank of second marquis before dying before his father, and most importantly, Yuan Feng, the third son who would eventually go on to have Yuan Shao, Yuan Ji, and Yuan Shu. But as we mentioned before in many of our other lore series, since Yuan Shao's mother was a maid, he did not have great standing within his particular branch of the family despite being firstborn. But fortunately for him, his father's older brother, the second Marquis Yuan Cheng, did not have a son. So as customary in his days, Yuan Shao would eventually be passed over to his uncle to help continue his uncle's line. This obviously elevated his status within the clan, much to the dismay of the spoiled youngest son, Yuan Shu, who had grown up making fun of this older brother for the very fact that his mother was a maid. And this is why Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu are both brothers and also cousins. But we're going to be talking about them later on in separate lore series. So we're going to shift our focus back to the generation before them, as we still have Yuan Wei, who is not the next oldest in the line of 12 sons, but he is one of the 9 sons remaining. I actually don't know his exact standing, as it's kind of lost to history, but we do know that he's one of the more important sons for Yuan Tang, as he would become the last member of the clan to hold a Grand Excellency position. In 172, Yuan Wei would become the Grand Excellency for the very first time, before losing the job 4 years later due to the party incident. But then again, in 182, he would return to court as the Grand Excellency again, but he will lose the job once again in 185 due to the Liang Rebellion. But finally, in 189, right after Liu Hong's death, he would return to the court for the final time, as he will be named the Grand Tutor this time for the young emperor by Empress Dowager He, or Empress He, Hejin's sister. However, this is right before Dongzhuo took over, and Yuan Wei's nephews, Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu, would form this coalition against Dongzhuo, and Yuan Wei's entire line would actually get executed by Dongzhuo. So perhaps in his life, getting fired and staying fired might have been a good thing. Now, as for his brother, Yuan Feng, aside from being the famous father of both Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu, He also did a little bit of work himself. He got to the position of the 9 ministers as the minister coachman, similar to Yuan, and he also followed a similar path where he was the captain of the capital city guards, and he also would rise to one of the Grand Excellency positions, making him another member of the clan to hold this prestigious role, completing the 43 gong, 4 generations of Grand Excellencies. But the combination of his embrace of the political climate and the ambitions of his 2 sons would eventually doom their clan, and his generation would become the last generation of the clan to produce any Grand Excellency positions. And this leaves us with his 3 sons. And instead of covering all 3, we will ignore Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu and focus on Yuan Ji, who is actually the oldest son of the main wife and the one who would eventually inherit Yuan Feng's titles. But because of his inheritance of the titles and positions, he would actually work and stay in the capital, holding on to the post of Grand Tutor to the new crown prince. Therefore, when his other brothers took up arms against Dong Zhuo, he was also gathered up and executed alongside his uncle Yuan Wei, as Dong Zhuo didn't want to take any chances by having other Yuan clan members taking power within the capital. And with that, we have wrapped up this short series covering the achievement of the Yuan clan of Runan, as we witness how they rose from humble scholars studying the Book of Change to becoming one of the most powerful political clans in the later years of the Eastern Han Dynasty. Now, as we look forward to the next Let's Talk Lore series, we will be first turning our attention to Yuan Shu, the youngest son of Yuan Feng, and his grand ambitions of turning their clan's prestige into a brand new dynasty in the dynasty of Zhong. So hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode, and see you all next time. Bye!